Talk about a distorted visage. There aren't many things as strange or as twisted as the clown. A figure once known for their jovial and joyous acts of comedy, now immortalized as icons of horror and tragedy. For most, they end up either being a source of joy and occasional fetishization, or they're a subject of absolute terror. These white-faced freaks have been around for centuries at this point, and for one reason or another, they continue to find their way into the pop culture spotlight. From childhood entertainers, comic book villains, to even serial killers, these guys have a strange way of manifesting in almost every extreme of the emotional spectrum. And while that alone makes them pretty intriguing to dig into, this ability to exist on the fringe of every emotion has extended since their birth during the medieval age as jesters, being both the bringers of laughs and bearers of earth-shattering news. It's this duality of a clown's existence throughout their history that really cuts to the core of what makes them so interesting, as most traditions tend to die out in a matter of decades, or at least at the end of an era in history, where clowns and beings similar to them have existed as far back as the ancient times. But just how did they go from odd but family-friendly entertainers like Bozo to being depicted as brutal killers and monsters beyond our understanding? Well, it's a bit more complicated than most would think, with the history being layered in contradictions and shadows cast by the immorality that's always existed alongside them. So, why don't we take a step into the absurd and take a peek behind the curtain and see the dark and twisted history of our childhood nightmares. This is the dark history of clowns.
I'm the Joker, baby!
There has been documentation of clown-esque figures as far back as ancient Egypt's 5th dynasty. Great societies, such the likes of Greece and Rome, also had their own variations of these figures, and even the Native American tribes, like the Sioux, contained documentation of figures like this as well. In this case, they were known as Hyokas. Though information on many of these early incarnations of the clown is, well, it's pretty sparse to say the least. Even the Roman Balitro, who has more than most written about them, still only relays that they were an early kind of entertainer who served more as a comedic host, as well as an early variation of the stand-up comedian. Jesters, on the other hand, however, are the most direct forefathers of clowns, as well as the most documented. A simple look at their colorful clothes, exaggerated masks, and more crass and maniacal senses of humor will give that away. But that's the least of what makes these guys so eerie yet interesting. An offensive and mocking figure who behaves in an erratic and eccentric way at the expense of royalty is probably the last thing that you would expect to be a mainstay of an era in history defined by its authoritative and war-hungry monarchies. Yet the Jester wasn't just a mainstay, but a necessity of the time. And they weren't just entertainers either. They were actually key figures in both the king's court, as well as diplomatic relationships with other nations. The term court jester is used because they often were appointed as key aspects of the discussion. While their main job was to entertain the court and lighten the mood during heavy moments, there were times where they were able to advise and give suggestions. While this might seem simple as it's a court and most of us have a democratic standpoint of how we expect those things to work, this is the medieval era we're talking about, and free speech wasn't exactly a thing. And if you said the wrong thing to the wrong person, especially someone of high status, you're probably going to end up on the back of a milk carton, or in this case, the business end of a guillotine. These colorful fools had a unique privilege to speak and mock freely and openly. So in the courts, outside of the king, the jester was the only one who could truly speak his mind. A jester might sometimes entertain, but when it came time, he would also advise, and jesters were known for being more garish and harsh in their suggestions. But if things became too much for the king's ego, he would also use the fool as his personal punching bag. However, the jester's privilege would also come at a cost. It was their responsibility to relay news and messages that the rest of the court was too afraid to give to the king. For example, an infamous quote from a French jester relaying to the king that their fleet had been destroyed by the English was something along the lines of, "The English sailors don't have the guts to jump in the water like our brave French." While being the bearer of bad news might sound like a fun job at first, it was a double-sided affair, as jesters were used as messengers between kingdoms, often being the ones tasked with delivering declarations of war, requests to relinquish land, among other things that would most of the time piss off the other side. And it's actually here where the term "killing the messenger" was born, as fools would often be killed or savagely beaten if their message at all brought offense or outrage. But the dark side of being a fool doesn't just end there, because in a few cases, jesters were actually sent on the front lines of battle in an early approach to psychological warfare, mocking and deriding the other side as they would be attacked and slaughtered. In essence, they were the first irony posters, though instead of posting memes on a Reddit thread, they were pissing on the corpses of those that they slaughtered. At least that's what I'd like to believe. In reality, they were probably some of the first to die in battle. The life of a jester was a dark and callous one. For someone known for their colorful attire and cheerful antics, the visage of one would often bring a sense of confusion. As I described in my Uncanny Valley video, when you saw a jester, you never knew whether they came bearing laughs or came bearing earth-shattering news, building up the dark mystique that would come to define the very nature of clowns, even to this day.
Breakfast! I'm hungry! Take it from Carinkles. That's me. The best breakfast under the big top is post-sugar rice Carinkles. It's so good, I carinkle every time I eat it.
The clowns we all know and love found most of their inspiration descending from the Zani, a figure from Italian comedic theater, one who obviously bears a striking resemblance to that of a jester. The name clown itself has a few different origins, but became synonymous with fools thanks to the work of Shakespeare. From here, they would start being used as a character archetype meant to be the foil to the English harlequin in the 17th century theater, with the harlequin being seen as a cunning and agile figure and the clown being a clumsy and stupid one. Though in their early depictions they resembled jesters far less, and rather were a bit of a classist depiction of the poor, as well as a, well, to put it in a polite way, depiction of the mentally deficient, often wearing tattered and dirty garb associated with servants and peasants, and having the IQ of a ham sandwich. The more colorful and abstract appearance we all know wouldn't come until later, after a lot of key developments to the clown's character came in the early 1800s, thanks to the actor Joseph Grimaldi, iconically playing the clown in Charles Dickens' play Harlequin in the Flying World, donning the white and red face paint and colorful attire that would become the defining look we think of when someone utters the phrase clown. Grimaldi himself even played into the dual nature of the clown's lore. On stage, he would perform an act defined by its physical comedy and cheerful nature, while in his real life, he was extremely depressed. Joseph Grimaldi didn't exactly have the most fortunate life. His first wife would die during childbirth, and his son would die from alcoholism at the age of 31. And if that wasn't tragic enough, In his later life, Grimaldi was left physically disabled and suffered from severe chronic pain from his lifetime of physical slapstick comedy. The dual nature of his existence can be summed up by one of his alleged quotes: "I am grim all day, but I make you laugh at night." Now, on a less depressing note, the next big evolution of clowns would come around during the heyday of the carnival. While many might think that a circus and carnival are one and the same, it's far from the truth, though in the modern day they are a bit inseparable. Clowns and their predecessors have almost always been synonymous with both the circus and carnival, becoming more and more prominent as they developed during the 1800s. Though some performers, like the King of Clowns himself, would go to great lengths to break out of the typical circus performer framework. Swiss clown Charles Wedak would come to fame as he began performing in theaters and musical halls, earning clowns a permanent fixture in vaudevillian entertainment. Now, how anybody found comedy from something that looked as horrifying as this, I'm not too sure. But as the modern age came, they would become more widespread across the Western world, becoming the de facto face of both circuses and carnivals, developing reputations for being charismatic and fun entertainers, and predominantly enjoyed by children. Something that would come to be a bit ironic as the years passed.
Well, I was at this party when I saw this girl. She was looking really good, the cutest thing in the world. I walked over to her and I said hello. And I asked her if maybe she wanted to get to know me.
Even during the early days, it didn't take long before a dark shadow started to be cast by the clown. French performer and another dominant figure in developing the clown's lore would be Jean Gaspard, who might actually be the first documentation of a killer clown. While Jean might have been known as an actor, he was also someone known for his hot temper, and in 1836, it would culminate in his rage taking the life of a young boy as he beat him over the head with a cane after the boy had insulted him, marking the first bloodstain on the clown's already distorted visage. Couple this with the convoluted and dark reality of the court jester, and clowns were almost destined from the beginning to be seen in a grim and strange light. I mean, just look at these freaky fucks. But they really do go a long way in really showing in a visual manner just how distorted and strange the entire idea of a clown was. But regardless of the histories of the jester or the strange dual nature of the clown, there really is only one man who we can look to as the official turning point. Or, if you will, the point of no return. The infamous John Wayne Gacy, aka Pogo the Clown, can be seen as the integral piece of the puzzle in transforming clowns from just unsettling and harmless entertainers to a mainstay of cultural distrust and terror.
They executed that search warrant, they went in the crawl space, and the very first shovel that they dug, they found human remains.
Gacy isn't just infamous for being a clown with a penchant for murder, but being one of the most grisly and sadistic serial killers we've seen in the modern age. During the day, he was nothing more than a family man, working as the owner and operator of a few KFC locations, performing at parties and children's events as a clown, going by the name Pogo or Patches, and overall just being a well-respected and beloved member of his community. Yet, under the moonlight, he engaged in his hidden sadistic impulses,
Gacy had started to build the perfect life for himself, but he was concealing a dark secret. He developed an unhealthy sexual interest in young boys.
Even as a child, Gacy would take out his sadism on those around him, even going as far as a young girl during his elementary years. Though the abuse was not one-sided, Gacy did suffer from the physical abuse and vicious beatings from his deadbeat alcoholic father, and relentless bullying in school.
Gacy had a difficult upbringing. His father was an alcoholic who was reportedly both mentally and physically abusive to his children and their mother.
His father spent apparently all of Gacy's childhood demeaning him and physically punishing him and telling him how stupid and worthless and effeminate he was.
It would all help shape the heart of darkness laying dormant in the young sociopath, with it all culminating in one of the most tragic events for young Gacy, when he was routinely molested by a pair of family friends. With an upbringing as horrifying as this, it's honestly not a surprise to see how Gacy would end up developing into the monster that he would be known as. Beginning his criminal career in the 60s by grooming and sexually assaulting teenage boys, using blackmail to intimidate his victims into silence, though this would eventually catch up to him and he would be sentenced to prison for sodomy charges. Though during his stay in prison, he was seen as a model prisoner, and ended up being released on parole after serving 18 months of a 10-year sentence. This didn't take long to escalate though, as I'm sure anyone familiar already knows. His pedophilic tendencies almost instantly came out as he started to enact the same cycle of violence he was imprisoned for. Around the same time, he was able to get a farmhouse in Iowa and use some of his connections to begin work as a clown, all while engaging in sexual crimes against those around him, predominantly teenage boys, and beginning his murder spree that would go on for years, from kidnapping, sexual assault, and sadistic abuse and strangulation. Gacy indulged in some of the most sickening murders one could imagine.
They recovered various items of pornography. They recovered some books that were titled Pretty Boys Must Die. They also recovered driver's licenses of other young people. When they did a check on those driver's licenses, it was determined that those kids were also reported missing.
It wasn't until 1978 that the police finally began investigating the disappearances and murders surrounding Gacy, and after a long investigation, they would begin to circle in on Pogo the Clown. This would all culminate in a drunken confession where Gacy would admit to killing over 30 people, and upon an investigation of his house, they discovered a crawl space containing many of the victims' bodies, eventually leading him to getting the lethal injection. All of this happened while he maintained the life of a family man and daylighted as a fun-loving clown, performing for children's hospitals and birthday parties. A truly horrifying notion that would come to define the clown itself. And after this revelation, the media firestorm surrounding the situation, and the image of the clown was forever tainted. No longer a laughing, jovial character designed to entertain children and families, but now the shattered visage of evil and a wolf in sheep's clothing. In a post-Gacy world, and as times really started to change in terms of what was considered family-friendly or children's entertainment, the clown's once clean and silly image had transformed, now casting a long and morbid shadow. The Joker was already a staple villain in comics, But pre-Gacy, he was a more simplistic character, eccentric and dangerous, but more fun and lighthearted, like most comics of this time. But once the post-Gacy 80s rolled around, depictions of the Joker would begin to be far darker and way more sadistic, whether he be a mob boss, bloodthirsty vampire, domestic terrorist, or a crazed killer. Even the most recent theater adaptations use the Clown Prince of Crime as an allegory for societal decay and mental decline,
Get what you fucking deserve!
further cementing the clown's image as a bit of a visage of terror and decay. Another famous clown of this nature would be Pennywise from Stephen King's novel It.
Hiya, Georgie. What a nice pony.
Who played a key role in the clown's descent into darkness. Whether King was inspired by Gacy's story or not, his clown had a lot in common with him. Both disguised themselves as children's entertainers, luring young children to their tragic deaths. Pennywise would become an icon and a pop culture staple himself, and what made him such a compelling character was the fact that he really embodied the terror that comes from a clown. From his off-putting and uncomfortable comedy sections, his ever-changing and shifting appearance, and his actions of distant creeping force, always stalking the children and feeding on their fear. It's really no surprise that he would become one of the defining characters we think of when we hear the words evil clown. The evil clown craze would also take forms in more lighthearted ways as well. Killer Clowns from Outer Space was an influential B-movie that might not have been a household name, but nonetheless it did a lot of heavy lifting in spreading this darker, more horrific image of the clown, the antagonists of the film being comically twisted aliens in famous face paint and makeup, running around terrorizing a small town, harvesting humans for consumption, as well as just slaughtering whoever they wanted in a hilarious and almost Looney Tunes type way. While Killer Clowns from Outer Space never made its way into the mainstream, it always maintained a cult fan base thanks to its more niche appeal. It served as further inspiration to other creatives in their endeavors, furthering the perversion of our white-faced friends' once comedic and wholesome image. The once friendly yet uncanny family entertainers had essentially fully transformed into apparitions of terror, and no matter what they were doing, they were always involved in something sinister and terrible. Even when attempting to be more child-friendly with mascots like Ronald McDonald, thanks to the child obesity epidemic, the raising awareness of just how bad and toxic fast food was, well, even the once lovable Ronald was being seen as being shrouded in darkness. And this is all without referencing the infamous Juggalos, a massive fan base surrounding Insane Clown Posse and surrounding the greater horrorcore movement that they inspired, which boasts a massive music festival and dedicated legions of fans who even got classified as a gang by the FBI. Now, say what you will about how cringy some of the music can be or the overzealous and obnoxious behavior some Juggalos exhibit, their pop culture and influence cannot be understated. And again, it's just another notch and another nail in the coffin of the clown's once family-friendly image. And while I can sit here all day and talk about the countless depictions of evil and horrifying clowns like the many found in Rob Zombie's filmography, or games like Carnival and even Twisted Metal, or the simple existence of art in the Terrifier series, I think what really shows off how deep the abyss of terror has become is simply acknowledging the scary clown epidemic of 2016.
It's a trend spooking the nation, creepy clown sightings. Now they're threatening school districts. Police and Homeland Security are investigating scary Instagram posts in Philadelphia. The posts from over the weekend all use the word clown. Some even talk about blowing up schools. The unusual reports started surfacing back in August in Greenville, South Carolina.
For months on end, we saw countless reports online and on the news about sightings of scary clowns, footage of them coming to people's door cameras, and even some arrests surrounding groups making threats of violence.
In LaGrange, Georgia, police posted about issuing warrants for 4 people on charges of making terroristic threats and disrupting public schools.
The entire situation quickly spiraled from a strange but funny event to something far more real than anyone could have ever expected. And in a way, finally shutting the door on the previous life of children's entertainment and family-friendly nature. I mean, when was the last time you saw a clown seriously used as a positive and fun character and not just a stand-in for terror and evil? I think it's safe to say that the dark visage of a clown is a much deeper rabbit hole than most of us would expect, with a rich and interesting history, full of strange and off-putting twists and turns. Researching for this video was such a surreal experience, uncovering the bizarre nature of the court jester and the weird duality of early clowns. I had no idea who Joseph Grimaldi was before this, and that he was such a depressive and tragic character. And in many ways, the violent and callous nature of even the Jesters really set the roots that would eventually turn into the ivy that would choke out any semblance of wholesomeness and family friendliness from the clown's image in our time. I think it's safe to say that they've earned the scary image that they have today and will continue to be a huge landmark in pop culture, with many characters like Pennywise and the Joker's popularity only continuing to grow as they age. But with all that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter. I'll see you in the next video.